So I'm hoping to weed things out here. In fact, Henry, I'm really thinking after our last meeting here, and some of the things you said, I think I really want to winnow down to just special collections and the real old tomes, and let this stuff, scan it, get it online, find links to these things and make them available, but not necessarily have to hold them. But keep the really nice, the old tomes, the rare stuff, because when you see in a moment, there are books from the 15, even 1400s here, one of a kind. And so I don't know why I'm genetically connected that way, where I have to buy or acquire or trade. I do more trading than I do buying. He wants two of these, I want one of these, and vice versa. And that's just led to the. Was he awake? Hi.
He started talking.
Was he crying?
No, he was going to.
These black books here. Oh, somebody else? Okay. Since the 1970s, probably 75, I've been collecting letters, personal letters, from individuals like, here's Samuel Wilberforce. You don't know him probably by name, but he's known as Soapy Sam. He was the one that conducted the monkey trials. And he's the Bishop of Oxford. No small character. In fact, I've got 31 of his letters, right? And it's all signed, one of a kind. Hook the same way. These are all major players. I have a letter from Abraham Lincoln's pastor, and they're all religious figures, prominent religious figures whose names you would find in Wikipedia. They're not insignificant folks, and some of them are very, very impressive. Like here's Trench. Trench was the Archbishop of Ireland forever. Here's a picture of him on the back with his signature. Trench's syntax and grammar book. This is Trench. This is the one. And remarkable character and full letter, one of a kind. And so when you start holding that kind of rare material, you kind of don't want to get rid of it. You don't mind trading, but you really want to keep it. Like here's a seal from 1801 on a letter of an Archbishop of Canterbury. The seals are always fun to have. But they're...
The seals will be on the letter?
Yeah, this was a personal letter, so it didn't have the whole strap to it. But I have the straps where you can actually see. I'll bring some out. I'll show you.
I thought that would be something on the envelope with the
on the envelope,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, let me show you the envelope because I have some of that too. Looking at names you might know. But these are all archbishops and bishops, Oxford professors, Cambridge professor. Oh, hi. We can get more chairs.
You know what?
No, we can get more chairs.
Somebody can sit on that, right?
Yeah. There's one more chair in the back too.
I've got the baby right now.
Yeah, we do sleep in that. This is the Archbishop of Canterbury. Here you can actually see his seal imprinted on top. And he's the one who put together the main text of Clement through photograph. So these are major figures from major universities. Christopher Wordsworth, the class starting on Thursday, you'll see his face because he was the first major academic to write on the Didache publicly. And these are all people like that, and that's what these are here. Charles Thorpe, those of you who have heard me talk about Durham or Lightfoot, this is the actual first dean and founder of the University of Durham. And I think I have 15 of his letters. 1800s, early 1800s. And so these kinds of things always attract. Oh, Robert Gregory, oh my gosh, what a brilliant scholar. We'll talk about him he's the one who was responsible for logging every manuscript in England, and his numbering system we still use to this day. So some of these people are librarians like that who affect biblical studies, or everything's in, here's one of my heroes, J. Randall Harris, wrote 4 books on the Didache. countless works on multiple subjects, as you know, and I think I must have 20 letters of his.
Gregory, you're saying he's the one that started the powers 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, he took over from Tischendorf, who was his mentor.
Oh.
So between the two of them, yeah. And here's Rendell Harris, and I have a letter from Rendell Harris to Lightfoot, and one from Lightfoot to Rendell Harris. So these are really, really remarkable. Well, we have 3,000 of them, 3,000 letters. And so we want to scan them and make them available to the public. Here's F.W. Farrar. His Life of Jesus and Life of Paul have never been superseded. They're still the most popular works ever.
What's his last name?
Farrar, F-A-R. Look under F's. Here's you were E's there. Just go on the very top shelf. Top shelf. Nope. Next one over to the right. Right that corner book in the very top. That's Farrar. Yeah. And the ones next to it are all fireworks. So some of these people are like that, where they're all big-time academics, so Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, but also United States. So it's from around the world, but that's what these are. And so I'm in that process now of scanning and annotating and making them available to the public, especially historians, because libraries love this stuff. Because it's a piece of life that you don't know about. No one knows these things exist unless you have a copy of it. And there's no copy back then. You don't write, who would write and then make a copy? Although that did happen, where you'd have a secretary copy for his own records. And those are the ones you usually find in big archival collections. So there's that, and there's other unique pieces like I have about 400 of these. They're not terribly, they're not breathtaking, but they're extremely rare. These are actual photographic cards, postcards. And that these same people who I have letters from, same people. And they're just letters, including Farrar and these individuals. And so there's about 400 of those as well. And so they're specific to what I'm doing, because it's nice to see a face that goes with the letter, right? And not an artist's rendition. We also have a lot of press photos. Press photos are unique to the industry. What would happen is Chicago or New York or some major publishing company would take a picture and then sell that picture. Every time they write a story about something, that picture would be used, and the credit would go back to the company, but the money would also stay there too. So these are all clerics, clergymen, and prominent religious figures from somewhere in here. I have even Billy Graham, who recently passed away. This guy is the one who wrote on Origin extensively. And they're scholars or clerics, or like you've all seen this picture. This is the original from which it came.
Wow.
So that's the original press release. So a lot of these, I have his father and his brother and anybody that's related to this field, or major librarians who specialized in this field. And that's what we do. We just collect this data because you can't find these things. And so we try to gather them, including people that are notorious, like Gardner Ted Armstrong. You've never seen a picture of him from the Worldwide Church of Christ. You can see looks pretty slick. Which he is, very slick in a way. So, Pat Robertson, because anything like that, anything a press photo, we try to grab because they're one of a kind, like a letter, one of a kind. So, we do that. And
What was the last picture in the other book? I just caught a glimpse of it, and it was, Norman Hill.
This one or the other one?
There was another one, next one before it. Very colorful looking. Oh well, I just caught a quick glimpse.
Yeah, they're and what I have them all scanned, so I'll make them available online. But yeah, they're unusual. The idea of capturing not just pieces of history, but capturing these unusual pieces of in a while you come across a family that's looking for a happy home for dad or something, right? David Berg would have got a kick out of this. This is out of England. This is everything on this life. All of his licenses. This is what you'd have to get to preach. So it's all on vellum, and then the Archbishop's seal, and that's how letters would come. Very cool, right? But you do this for every aspect of your ministerial life. You can't just start preaching in England. They don't allow that. So you become a deacon, and here's like one of those slips, and here's this time just imprinted on. And that's the seal. That's the seal of, I don't know who it is here. The Bishop of Oxford. Oh, is that Bishop of Oxford? I'll take that. And these are the certificates and the license. Here's his license just to preach. And it requires the seal. It requires, we don't do anything like this in the United States. So here's
What year was this roughly?
1850. But they're like that to this day. They're every bit as diligent. Here's a certificate for the church to So it's pretty much, but this is just one person. Every person goes through this, and these things usually get lost or thrown away. But I thought they were fascinating. I mean, all that you have to go through, you can't just start preaching as independent.
Church of England, right?
Yeah, but even if you were, let's say, Unitarian or a Catholic in England, you have to be licensed. Yeah, they don't allow you in a church. Look at this one. Let's see what this is. Yeah, this is up in Durham, same character. But look at the detail. We don't do anything like this, like they did. And yeah, you display this. And this is parchment. Vellum. This is actual vellum. I can pass it around if you're so inclined. But vellum is cow skin and will last forever. And this is just one person, and we have lots of these. You pick them up, but you can see the amount of work that to go through for all aspects of life. And then I got pictures of him, typically what he looked like. I got pictures of him as a young man, pictures of him as an older man. And it's just, if I can find something like this that gives people the impression of the amount of work it took old school to actually become part of the system, it helps them understand that a person who's in a pulpit or a person who's in a university, he's there by luck. Somebody had to sign papers. You're being smart or being rich doesn't get you through that system. Well, unless your dad buys, wing to Oxford. No, in fact, I was writing on an individual last night who is not a hero, but he's certainly an important figure in the development of what I studied the most. And he couldn't afford Oxford. So he got top marks, but he couldn't afford it. So they sent him away to this minor school, and he got his degree and then had to work his way up. It took him his whole lifetime to work up to the place he would have been because he didn't have the money. And it's very expensive. Even back then it was expensive. You'd had to be a peer or have somebody who was in government to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And to go to Durham, that's usually a theological degree.
Before they had scholarships?
Before they had scholarships, and of course they like easy money. So they love Americans over there because there's no tuition for us. I mean, there's no scholarship for us. We have to pay full price. So they love that. But most of our faculty in America, if they're going to teach in a university, it's not usually Oxford, it's usually Durham. Durham is where clergy get their degrees, and it's a magnificent institution. But you go to Oxford for law and medicine, and you go to Cambridge for science, and it's all fascinating. We can leave this out. So that's part of the collections of what we have in that kind of unique setting, and I get them in all the time. Here's a whole packet of them, and they end up on my desk. You see there's just dozens and dozens and dozens, and I have no idea who they are. So it's now the ferreting process of going through and checking, and how can I tell by the letterhead and what I think the name is to the content, to the date, until you finally find, there it is! And it takes a long time. Takes a long time. I got hundreds of these. I have no idea who they are. Because, you know, sometimes they'll put them out for 10 cents a piece back then, way back, and I'd buy them all. I mean, at 10 cents a piece, what matter is there?
And there may be a treasure in there.
There often is, which is ends up in the big one. So the letter number is those I can identify. This is not, it wasn't even in a book. I found that William Weston, who did Josephus, he was the main translator of Josephus, the Jewish historian. He proposed that the Didache does exist. This is 1711, so long before the Didache was found, right? Isn't it 1711?
1711,
Yeah.
right.
Before the Didache was found, he was sure he found it. And his arguments are the same arguments you'd use to this day. He didn't find it, but it came awfully close to finding it. He found a document from which the Didache, oh sure. It's nothing. It's just, that's how I found it though. I found that in Scotland, in a bookstore right next to the cathedral. So those things are all gone.
Can you just explain the Didache again?
The Didache, the class on Thursday actually starts on the Didache.
Right. But I mean,
The Didache is the earliest catechism of Christianity. It means
okay.
it's the. So what did they really mean? What does it mean to love your neighbor? What does it mean to? What was baptism supposed to be like? And what was the meaning of fasting? And the kinds of things that we take for granted. The Didache was so scandalous that French Catholics were told or were forbidden to read it because it didn't follow.
Right, there was
It was published in 1883.
it was after the Reformation.
Oh, yeah,
so
long
there
after.
were a lot of things not acceptable like that.
Right, and to this day, in some places, you know.
And vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how much, like, even the individual who found the Didache, he wasn't censured, but Western scholars were not happy with some of his conclusions because it had to match Orthodox thought. It had to match the Eastern Church's perspective, so kind of didn't taint his history. He wrote the history through the eyes of someone who disagrees with content, even though it was a masterful work.
Well, what was the criteria for the reflection of answer the question?
Right, yeah, they didn't have that so much in that book. Oh, in fact, hold on, I think I have a torn down copy that I'm about to scan. I did a lot of these too, books that no one wants because they're broken down, and you know, the binding has come off them, and sometimes they're ideal for scanning because the binding has already been destroyed.
Right.
I'm looking to see which one this is. This is the original Didache. 1833.
Wow.
1883. Yeah, he wrote it through Constantinople. Here, hold on.
That is nonsense. It tells me something else.
All in Greek. All in academic Greek. So it's not even Greek. It's more.
It's a hyper Greek.
Yeah, and that's the original. And there's no binding, and I didn't care. I mean, I don't think there's two copies of this in the world, you know.
Yeah. Intact. That's amazing.
Here, just be very gentle, please. What's that?
I said I didn't
hi.
see Henry hiding there.
So, I have in the library, for example, I have books on everything related to early Christianity. But primarily my interest is the Apostolic Fathers in that early period of time. And I'll show you the volume in a minute. But when we look to the first time the Apostolic Fathers were translated, this is William Wake, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the people before him were major scholars, and each of them were working for other people, trying to also, you know, get the market cornered on these kinds of documents. And then in 1672, one man named Cordier decided he was going to translate everything and make it available to the academic world. And then after they were put in storage, about to be sent out, and a fire destroyed them all. And only 6 or 7 have survived. We have 4 of them. We have 4 of them. Like this Didache book. Here's another one broken down. Same book, but because it's broken down, they didn't think anything of it. Here's the Didache right there. You can see the Didache, teaching of the 12 apostles, and so that's how it opens right there. So on our website, we scan the pages, and I'll make this available because the whole thing has been scanned. We just haven't made it available yet. So the purpose is to, of course, make this stuff available to the public, get people interested in these kinds of works that are so rare. And even if you don't read academic Greek, the fact that there is a book that analogs the history behind the text and how it developed and why it has made such a tremendous impact on the Western world, because its subtitle is The Spoiled Child of Scholarship. More has been written about the Didache than any other work in history outside the New Testament. So that's pretty impressive. And so we have about 2,000 volumes, different titles on the Didache alone, because it's so interesting. But that's all part of the upcoming class. So for those of you who are going to the class, we are handing out the first night our thank you for joining the class. There was a man, perhaps you heard of him, from Russia, with the name Tolstoy, who wrote a book on wrote an essay on the Didache. So I'll be distributing it for free at our first class, so people can have a copy and reading what Tolstoy had to say, because he had very harsh words about the Russian Orthodox Church after reading the Didache, saying, why can't this be the church that we go to? Why can't the content, the simplicity, the honesty, the integrity, why can't that be our church? But because he's Tolstoy, nobody could do anything to him. Right? And the church was still a very prominent force at the time. So he wrote that in 1885. The first English printing of the Didache was 1884. So he didn't waste any time to jump on the bandwagon saying, I'm for this.
They did excommunicate him, though.
Yeah, well, more than once, actually. He's come back, and that was because of these kinds of comments. They excommunicated him, and then he made nice, and then excommunicated him again, and then he makes even more nice. But he seems to break constantly from the typical story that you expect in.
So the Didache, is that premise on the work, or is it premise on the scholarly work taken to the scripture, or is it?
It's oral traditions prior to Acts chapter 15 when the Gentiles are admitted, because it's a catechism for those Gentiles and teaching them this is what we believe and this is how we practice, and the whole thing takes about 15 minutes to read.
It's traditions as well.
It's apostolic. It's words from the teachings of the 12. In fact, it's called the teaching of the 12 apostles to the Gentiles. And a man who, I have all those works as well, and his autograph and everything, a man named Charles Taylor from Cambridge, he discovered that the Didache is based on a catechism, a Jewish catechism in the synagogue that he had a copy of. And so when you take those two, it makes perfect sense. The Christians embraced the same catechism as Jews because they were Jews, right? And they just augment it with the teachings of Jesus, so the same core is there, but now the Jesus element is present, and the apostolic practice of baptism or fasting or prayer and the nature of those things all captured. Now, like I said, the whole thing takes 15 minutes to read. It will take 8 weeks to cover it. Yeah, that's
Out there.
That's where it's out there. Well, it's like the very famous passage, and it's in this work as well. If anyone slapped you on the right cheek, turn to him off with the other. But in Greek, the word can mean beat or plumage or hit with a hammer. It can mean anything. But because it's a face, it has to be a slap. But then you have to look at what was the Didache talking about and what circumstances. The circumstances are don't yield to fleshly and bodily desires like retaliation. So rather than eye for eye, tooth for tooth, limb for limb, etc., it's all about what can I do to reconcile? What can I do to make friends? What can I do to love my neighbor? So it's defining love as one step beyond that expected in culture, that expected in society, that expected in the synagogue. And that makes good sense to me. Love is not a feeling. Love is an act that goes beyond the expectations of the people participating.
Love is patient.
Love is patient.
The word in Greek is acting long suffering. How long does it suffer? Well,
Yeah, or enduring.
enduring is the length of time.
Yeah.
Do these things which the New Testament addresses
Throughout.
again and again.
Oh, throughout, yeah, and that the Didache picks up the same theme. It's not about the convenience of what it offers you. It's what it really means ultimately to the overall message of the gospel. And there's nothing in the Didache that doesn't reflect exactly what you see in the Gospels. It's just the language is less guarded. You know it's early. I'll explain all that in class, but you know it's early because the language got him in trouble. When you use phrases like "Holy Child of God, drink His flesh and eat His blood," or "Drink His blood and eat His flesh," which was the way we translate it, it's really "Holy Child of God, who represents," right? Oh, the word was spread that Christians were cannibals, eating babies. Well, that language got changed before the year 50, before Christianity began to spread to the Gentiles. So that's a very early adaptation of Jesus and the apostles trying to make sense of it, even though it may not have been exactly the word that we would use in the West. If I give you one more example, it's really graphic, and I apologize for that, but blame Paul. The beauty of studying this from the original culture is looking at the intensity of the writing. For example, Paul feels quite deeply that his massacre of Christians and his rallying them up and persecuting them should forbid him from preaching at all. He's the first to say so. And the word that we use, I'm not worried because I'm one born late, seems to whitewash some of the actual language, because in Greek the word is a forced abortion. I was so forced into it, it was like an abortion. That's graphic. We'd never translate that. So we sanitize it for Scripture. And Paul has a lot of graphic language like that, where he's being as honest as he can. For the Judaizers who are insisting that Gentiles be circumcised, he says in Greek, I wish that they would cut it off. He means slip of the knife of their own.
Yeah, that's in Galatians.
It's clear as can
Clear
be.
as be.
Clear as
I
can
saw
be.
that, and it says mutilate your socks.
Yeah, self-mutilate. Yeah, clear as can be. Clear as
I
can
mean,
be.
it is graphic, and it
Yeah.
is,
But that's the nature of the early church, you know. It was
well, there's
honest.
something about the scripture too. That Jesus says this is a violent take effect. Well, you need to face reality. Gethsemane was not an easy thing. You keep thinking everything is. We sanitize it according.
We think
to,
Jesus pushed the pain button and just turned the pain off, you know.
And Paul
No.
gets it.
Right, and one of the things the hardest thing to teach modern students, because I've been a faculty member teaching at the university for 25 years, is what do you do now when I ask you, if Jesus were here today, would you crucify him? Well, then you don't understand crucifixion at all. You don't understand what it's about. Not just what it entailed, but what it meant. The absolute utter rejection of.
With the dehumanizing of human beings.
And even the way they treated the corpse, they just threw it away. That person's not a person. And the fact that Jesus' body was placed in a nice tomb was shocking at the time. We don't talk about that at all. Or even the blood of Christ. We think, the blood of Christ was because of this or that, but because we don't have a sacrificial system, the temple means nothing to us in the way that it did in the first century. Now, intimately, it was kind of not interjected as much as parallel of the service in the synagogue, and certainly that in the temple. So Jesus today has to be interpreted the same way as the Didache. Is what did it mean at the time? What was the bare bones form of it before we started layering it with Western traditions?
Well, what happens too is I don't realize that Christianity started to really infect the culture and infect everything. We come to be way more civilized, way more. They're on Roman rule, which life is the Jews didn't even count pretty much. But now we're so stepped away from that sacrifice really means in the whole story. So it's easier to look at the baby Jesus than it is.
Right, and you persecute me today, I'll throw you in jail. I have rights. They didn't have rights like that. You can only persecute me so far. Now, it's true I can be fired. I can walk with a picture of Buddha on my chest, but I can't walk with a picture of Jesus on my chest, right, on a shirt. And there's probably good reason for that, because they don't want their faculty aligned with the ideology of a president or whatever, right? But it's totally duplicit no matter what, this idea.
To me that all the other so-called gods, small Jews, none of them has the power. The name of Jesus has so much power that when you put that there, it has a visceral effect to everybody around you. You're either drawn to it or away from it. And so
In 300, Diocletian launched a campaign against the church. It was the final and brutal, end. At the very end, after 4 or 5 years of intense persecution, he called it off. And he said, I should never have done it. They've grown twice in number, because the message was more heard from those who were dying than those who were living. And we've lost that. You know, we used to say in the 60s, and we meant it at the time, if you were arrested for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to prove it? You know, no one thinks that way today. Christianity is whatever is comfortable for me within the church of my choice, within the environment of my upbringing. And it's all nice and good, but I really don't want to hear a rock concert for an hour and a half before I hear somebody give me a 10-minute sermon. That's not what I go to church for. I go to church for relationship. I go to church to encourage. I go to church to participate. I don't go to church to feel good. And to be honest, that's not worship. It's about you. It's not worship. It's about entertainment. And I don't want to be entertained. I have more important things to do with my life than have someone entertain me. Right? So, yeah, pardon?
Amen.
Yeah, thanks. It's not a well-delivered sermon, and I'll tell you what, it's not well-received. So this is just general history. All this room is just general history. The things that I turn to for the quick answer or the popular answer. And I would like to take you as far as I can, as far as the furniture will allow. And let's show you some things. Where's my Didache book? Pretty cool, huh? Thanks, Bill.
It doesn't stay on. It doesn't stay in any fabric.
So you gotta remember the
Sure.
name.
It's
Flannel,
I-
flannel.
I do remember my name, at least.
It's for us, not everybody.
For others. By the way, is the plural of leaf leaves?
What is the person?
I don't know, I'm the single one.
First
Yeah,
name?
what
What is
it?
Charles Kennedy, headmaster of
I would say
Cambridge.
that it would be the leaf.
The leaves. The leaves are here.
He's not a leaf though, he's a doll.
Don't laugh at my knife, it's not mine, it's my dad. It's one of the few things he left me. Begin to wonder, why is that? Is that a message?
Circumcision knife?
Yeah,
The following, or what?
sure.
Where's he going?
Come on in here. We'll probably have to.
Maybe I'll stick to the chair.
Hello, how are you?
No, actually, I do repair a lot of books, and this is very effective. And those who are in need some persuading.
It's very effective at that too, isn't it?
Give it to Kara.
Didn't that come from the
We have ways
Inquisition?
of making.
Yeah, you think.
Yes,
My grandson's in trouble today.
the soundproof room, right?
Yeah, you think. Come on in, everybody. In fact, let me stand in the corner here,
There you go.
and that way I can show
Yeah, you can talk.
this one section. Come on in, Becky. Jennifer. That's fairly new. He's from Berkeley.
This is a secret reading room.
Okay? All right.
Yes.
Would you like to come in?
Oh, you know me, I'm just hovering in case you get upset or.
Middle. If that continues, then I'll take him. I just wanted to show, like, here's the Didache starting in book form, starting here all the way through here. There's that much, and that's not articles. Journal articles, there's easily 1,000 of them. But yeah, everything from Philip Schaff, the man who wrote the 7-volume History of Christianity. This is his edition of the Didache. This is one of the leading professors at Berkeley, who also wrote a very fat book on the Didache. He dates at the same time I do. This one came out a couple of years ago. He's from University of Birmingham. Here is Robertson from Cambridge, and Dean of Wales. He compared the Didache, Hermas, and Barnabas because they all have the two-way section. But there are two ways, one in life, one death. Yeah. And but I wanted to focus on something different than the Didache, to be honest with you. I'm putting something online. It's taking me a long time because it's detailed. I'm trying to put an introduction to the Apostolic Fathers, which is this, and this, and historically, so you see who's borrowing from whom, right? And so the first thing I was putting together were all the manuscripts, and this is the only Syriac manuscript let's get the onion paper up. Okay. But when you look at it from Bensley's perspective, so all the text is there. But this is the only copy of Clement. Clement wrote in 96. It's the earliest document we have from the Church of Rome. And his epistle is written to the Corinthians. He reminds them what Paul wrote 40 years ago. It's the most remarkable text we have from the early church with regard to impact because it actually was canonical in some regions. When Codex Sinaiticus was brought to England in 1629, they found that Clement was attached to it. So this is the fourth most important biblical manuscript, and this work was attached to it because it's read so frequently. And there's nothing in here apart from Pauline theology. He tells us that Paul does get released one more time. He tells us Paul does go to Spain. He tells us that the last visit of Paul, that's not in the book of Acts, he covers. Where Paul's in prison at the end of Acts, he takes the next step and tells you what happens because he's the disciple of Paul. So I want to keep that down because I actually have to scan that. But these are all just Clement, whether it's in German from leading scholars or English or French or whatever is necessary. Like this was the very popular edition of Clement. But right now I'm going through all the manuscripts and gathering them and scanning them so that when I open this section of the website, anybody can go in and see the original Codex Alexandrinus or the Brinius document that has it or the Syriac text anywhere in the world. That's what we do. We try to take the holdings here and make them available around the world. So that's what all this is. Gnosticism picks up here, but only the primary materials and the Hebrew stuff that I need for this library is here. And then here are the original collections of early Christian literature. But you can see it's a lot of material. Stay where you are. I'll take my handy knife. Because I want to stab myself. I want to, because the cases aren't up. So we'll stay. I hope to have the cases this way I'll show you. But that's okay. But the older tomes, as you can see, look like this. And that's Irenaeus. So the more spectacular works are still in boxes and they go in these glass shelves that are behind me. I think this is the only place in the United States this book is found. In fact, I'm sure of it. But a lot of work went to it. And all this was done by hand because this is before the Greek font. It was all etched backwards in metal and pressed.
So what year was that been
This
published?
is 17, this isn't overly early. I can't read upside
Or
down.
because it's Greek, it wouldn't, it would
Latin and
be
Greek.
it would have been hand printed.
Yeah, hand printed. Yeah. 1711. Okay, let me get a couple more of these. Because they are fascinating when you... I had pillows in it. This is the last box of that piece. Oops, I'm sorry. Didn't say it was a sharp knife, I just said it was a knife.
You really need to wear
I
it.
remember, yeah. I'll remember.
Yeah, no, I can remember.
You can see how the book was actually put
A
together.
large group, so.
This is Irenaeus from 1639. You can see the paper isn't quite as good a quality as I look through it. You can see. And Irenaeus wrote in the 2nd century. He was the one that first opposed Gnosticism publicly.
1779. What's CA? That's London.
London.
What this
Oh, I
place is.
It's you must be related
Of
of
let me see where I'm up.
something of Paris.
It could be at something of the
Or library or
of the
something.
Parisians.
So the dedication
I
here.
mean, it looks like a name of a place, or
Must be. But yeah, these are pretty spectacular and of course one of a kind of items. Haven't been through so many of the rare libraries in this country, especially universities.
This was before eyeglasses were invented.
Oh gosh, and the pain that would cause. Unless you see this, that's nothing. It's great, but I'm not going to see this. Here's Justin Martyr, the guy who framed Western theology for the first time.
This is in the 17th century.
Right. This is 1686.
86.
Yeah, 1686.
Always called a philosopher.
Yeah. Well, he was. He was a Stoic. Yeah. But you can see the ink and such has not been happy in every page, but all the better for me. But why do we have these?
What's the
It's rag.
Right.
Yeah. The beauty of this to me is this stuff has been studied for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we never hear about it in the church. Why? The material exists. I'll just take one more out. Looks like
What does this set up, this whole thing? I mean, all these volumes are
these are just tomes.
just...
Just tomes. They were just too large to fit in cases, and they looked. I said Justin, another Justin.
No, I mean, who were they put out by originally?
Oh, usually by major university systems. Oh yeah. Oh, here's one of my favorites. Look at the binding on this. So you have to unclip in order to open. And then open gently.
And where did you find these?
Usually England and France. England and France. And when they weren't looking at Oxford, I just packed them and left. No one cares. These old books. But here's
You see,
Irenaeus.
that's the paper, right? Yeah,
Look at the
yeah.
date on this one.
They were hoarding.
1575.
Wow.
1575.
Pretty good condition.
You'd think. Yeah, you'd think it'd be all beat up. That's because you keep the tire off. Put everything together. Let's take one more out. But a lot of these go back. Irenaeus. Maybe it's volume 2 of that one. Oh, here's the one. Another Justin Martyr. Can't have too many Justin Martyrs. The framer of Western theology. So you want to get, there we go. In fact, in there somewhere is the very first printed Justin Martyr from 1551. And if you look at the very bottom, it'll say the printer is Stephanus, and Stephanus is the one who published the King James Bible, and was the first to put all the annotations of verses. He was the first to do so.
Oh.
The next year, he published Justin Martyr. So, yeah, but look at that with the parallel Greek and Latin. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, people forget that they went from the Greek to the Latin, and it was a long time.
Yeah, well, ecclesiastical Latin defined everything for so many centuries. But we won't go through them. There's about 28 boxes of these. But you get the idea of what's here. I'm going to be putting these in the case tomorrow anyway, now that we have carpeting. I'll show you a few more things.
Yeah, that would have gone through my attic too.
Well, you know, you speak of attics. A few years ago, I was in London with my handy-dandy map of all the bookstores in England. And I went across this one store and I said, "That doesn't look like a bookstore to me." And it wasn't. It was it had become a frame shop. And so I thought, that's unusual. Why would a frame shop still be inside their roster? And the truth is, the lady who now owns it is the daughter of the man who owned it. She said, "We haven't looked upstairs in years. That's where all his books were. If you want to go through them, you're welcome to them." So I opened the first box, and the opening pages, World War II ends. No one has touched the paper since World War II. And the boxes were filled with this stuff, just filled with it. So
They were glad you came, and you were glad
oh gosh,
they
they
saved
were
it.
really glad to get rid of it.
It's a win-win. That's great. Great story.
But you don't get lucky like that all the time, you know. And so all the biblical manuscripts are here too, facsimiles of course. And we will photograph that and scan that and make it accessible as well, so that people around the world can have access to Codex Alexandrinus and Sinaiticus and all the major manuscripts, all the Tischendorf and those things. We have all that. And so we'll scan those, take pictures of them, and get them back out to the public. Because the public doesn't have access to it.
Is this the whole collection of me?
No, gosh,
No,
it would fill this whole
Yeah,
place.
that's right.
I stopped at the 3rd century, which was when my interest stopped, because they were extremely expensive, and they only had them up through like 5 more volumes. So I said, I'll just pick this one, and that's it. Any other questions I can address? This is just early Christian literature. Okay. Now let's see if we can't get you at least a peek in the other stuff. Because we couldn't move things out, this is New Testament commentaries. So take your gander at them. Not another rule in case it just like to walk the floor. So there it is.
That's all enough view yet.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a big room.
Yeah, we'll have
There's still rain coming through.
I think I can take you now. You ready? If you'll, well, I can't open it from that end. If you'll gently lift up the front of that, you'll see that it's a piano from 16. That's going to go on this side when you walk in. It'll be one of those pieces. I love antiques, and I spent years and years and years redoing things. And this was one of them I decided I wouldn't get rid of. I just love this piece. It's beautiful. Oh, it's amazing. Most of the antiques, they're gone. I have a couple of Victrolas left. People beg for them, and let them go. But you see the cases are still here. Actually, you'll see in there dozens of cases and dozens of cases here. And it's just trying to keep up with it. I don't know how much of this thing I'll be able to fit here, but we'll see. Any other questions I can address? Give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. I imagine it'll be one more week before I actually will have these up and around. They have to come back. I see them put all the base on and then work out some of the bugs. I see some ripples that I have to take out. But I imagine by the end of next week, end of this week, I should have almost all the manuscripts and all those books and the piano moves and all that. But we should have it done today. It was going to be for sure. And this is our 8th or 9th for sure. art history. Yeah, terribly important because it helps define, there's a lot of art books here, in fact, it helps define popular ideas about these biblical characters. So,
We were, in, a mother came, I was raised Catholic, but she came to visit one year, they had the Vatican collection up in San Francisco.
I
What a
heard.
treat.
yeah, I didn't make it, but I heard, yeah.
It was really very, very interesting because it takes you from the primitive in the early centuries, and then, of course, it gets into the Reformation, but after that, the Renaissance, then it becomes man-centered and
Right.
stuff, and, you know, all the
Yeah, the library at the Vatican is amazing. It's not stuff I particularly care about, but they do have 3 or 4 manuscripts I'd like to be able to take a look at. There's a couple of there. Yeah, the Vatican is still the #1 most important biblical manuscript we have, right here in the Vatican. So, yeah, I love that. I love that stuff. But I have Vaticanus in printed, in form that I can photograph because it's 150 years ago. And make available to the public, and that's the big goal, you know, take the letters, take the rare stuff, and start making, I want to show you one more thing, I'm sorry.
Gosh,
I just
good
have,
baby.
have to grab my computer, stay.
Thank you. People think that they're trouble.
We're going back to.
Oh, okay.
Brent jumps around a lot.
So follow me.
Yeah. Yeah. They're really comfortable too.
My mother had a queen and sofa all hand carved, all exposed wood, and they stuck
The door things that have been fastened endlessly. No one knows this yet. But our first ebook is now out. And here it is on the digital.
I can't wait.
And it looks like what we call a book.
That's another lifetime.
So it goes step by step, piece by piece. And it's the book on the Divicate. Yeah. So we're ready for that. That's going to get launched almost any day now. I've decided to add a paraphrase to it, otherwise it had been already out. So I'm creating that, and then let me get a photo up here.
And we're trying to find a place where you would be able to order it printed as well.
Yeah, they do exist,
Yeah.
that's for sure. We also take looking for a certain form of wood. The earliest I'd like it to be a PDF. Give me a second, please. I work on so many things in one day that I often forget how heavy it is. Okay, here it is. So this is also what we do. Here's the earliest English translation of the Apostolic Fathers. So we'll take them and copy them exactly and make them available to the public with all notes and everything. 1668. So the earliest edition, this is Ignatius, Polycarp, Clement. You're not going to find this anywhere. We're the only ones that have it. So the earliest translation in English. And no Didache because Didache wasn't found for another 300 years. So that's what we do. We make things available, we replicate, we preserve, we analyze, we teach, we do all those things to try to involve the public in their history of literature as well as the content it contains. I'll take my boy now.
No.
Making faces at us.
How you doing? Okay, any questions I can address? Hopefully you get an idea. I'm working on another one of these. I like the old tomes, especially in English, because people don't know they exist, and yet not only do they exist, the translations are pretty straightforward and just as honest as us today if they have the ability to do so. William Wake's translation, which became the standard for 450 years, my problem with it is it had to match Anglican scholarship. So his translation is somewhat askew, and I don't like that. But you need to publish it because it became the standard, and the standard is what we're fighting against, just like we do with Paul or anybody else. If you have a standard Catholic version or Protestant version or Orthodox version of something, and it hasn't really been updated since major councils, yeah, it's time to address those issues. And just like Scripture, make this stuff available. He's okay, really. He's just trying to. We noticed we both have the same birthmark. It's called his nails. All right. What else can I answer or address? Anything else?
No?
We do have thousands of coins as well, and that's what I have to use those two shelves just to find out what coins are. Coins are way easier than letters because they mint them and they're permanent. Letters, anybody can write any signature. I never know what that signature is. Never in a million years, unless I travel. I write a lot of letters or emails telling people, can you help me who this person is? He was a rector back in 1789, and sometimes they'll reply. So I'll know his name, but that's all I know. So you have to trace it out. It's fun. I was talking about Oscar Murdoch earlier, who's from Berkeley, GTU. His pastime, he spent all of his pastime filling in parentheses. If you ever pick up a book and you see brackets and it has a name in it, it's because people like him determined who the author was. It was issued without an author. It was a scandalous book or issued without an author. So their job is to pursue every angle they possibly can to find out who it is and get that name in there and walk away with no credit whatsoever. Just to update files of who wrote what, when, where, under what circumstances. So I like that. That's what library should be doing. We should make the stuff available to the public in any way possible that helps perpetuate discussion and unify people. All right. Anything else I can address?
Feel free to grab some more food.
Grab some more food.
Put it in water, whatever you like.
Talk amongst yourselves.
If anybody needs to use a restroom, I have the key.